So let's start our meeting. Yes. So I will give a short description about our how you told dialogical
dialogical conversation.
Yes, thanks. Yeah. It's like dialogical interview or things. Before we kind of had such type of events, but we did such type of events on another platform, yeah, and we call them like online streaming. But dialogical interview, that actually idea I really like. Thanks, Birmet. And today we have a guest, yeah, from New York, Kathi. She kind of lovely agreed to be our participant, our guest. She's from New York, as I mentioned, and we are on another continent. We are in Central Asia, in Kyrgyzstan. We have time difference, but in that sense, we have common trend. Trauma. So this is actually topic. I mean this topic very popular. Yeah, now not only now, but maybe for the last I don't know 2 or 3 decades. I believe. Yeah, this topic is very popular. And before the kind of meeting, we were discussing, yeah, with Birmet that because Kathi, you are in United States, that is why you kind of have experience to meet with this. Actually not a trend, but with this concept earlier a little bit. I mean, it became trend earlier in your place than in ours. But nowadays, here in all Russian-speaking countries, everyone knows what is trauma. I mean, the word trauma, everyone tells you are traumatized. And another favorite words like, oh, you are narcissistic, oh, you are toxic. So these kind of words are very popular now. But in that sense, I asked you yet to be our guest today because you are professional in this field and because this word is very popular now, this concept is very popular. That is why it would be really cool to understand what trauma is. Maybe it's really kind of fashionable now. Yes, of course, we have to thank in that sense Freud, who gifted us this term. But right. Anyway, we have a different tendency. Okay, it's like a lecture again. Sorry, I took a lot of kind of minutes. Today, in dialogue with you will be Birmet. Yeah, Birmet is part of our team. Our project name is Professional Platform. But Birmet will tell a little bit more, yeah, about this project. So, and people who are watching us, I will ask you to write some question if you have in chat, yes, and we kind of will answer. So I will turn off my video for some time and then we'll come back to you. Okay, words to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Angelina.
Perfect. Greetings to everyone who joined us. My name is Birmet. As Angelina said before, I'm a part of Professional Platform organization in Kyrgyz Republic. This is just to tell you a little bit more about what it is, a little introduction. Basically, it's a platform that provides a way for local professionals in Central Asia and in a wider area of mostly just Russian-speaking post-Soviet Union countries to share experiences with each other and get much more experiences from professionals, yeah, in the area of psychology, psychotherapy, psychological counseling, and yeah. This is basically the organization, what organization does, organizes different events. And one of them is this amazing event tonight with Kathi Singh. Could you please introduce yourself a little bit?
Thank you, Birmet, and thank you, Angelina, for that introduction. So I'm Kathi, and as Angelina said, I'm in New York. And I consider myself a trauma specialist, and I started out in the field of rehabilitation counseling, sort of in the medical field, working with disabilities and reasonable accommodations. And we were talking about physical disabilities, and my interest was in mental disabilities and how they co-occur. And it was after graduation with a master's in rehabilitation that I began working in chemical dependency agencies in and around New York. And gradually that interest in trauma grew, and pursued postgraduate training in EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Pursued training in internal family systems. EMDR is Francine Shapiro's work. Internal family systems is Richard Schwartz, and spent 2 years in an integrative trauma program doing that. And I found that as I was doing a lot of work within a postgraduate center, that there were certain aspects of mindfulness that were missing. And I feel that eventually what started happening was over a decade or so, a gradual integration, more so of Eastern and Asian concepts in the way that I work with clients with trauma. And now I find myself doing a lot more philosophy, possibly existential philosophy, and reprocessing of trauma. I do a lot of work for the International Focusing Institute, and that promotes the work of Eugene Genlin, who is a phenomenologist and a philosopher. And that's primarily where my specialty lies today, is in this area of trauma.
Wow, that all sounds amazing. The whole experience, and thank you for sharing your way into getting into the topic. So for a wider audience that is listening to us today, could we clarify just for a second, what do we understand by trauma, or what is usually understood by trauma nowadays?
So trauma is usually, it's understood here in the West sort of from a place of sympathetic and parasympathetic, the body reaction neurologically to a stressor, an adverse event that might impact sleep, digestion, procreation.
Right.
It's a traumatic event to the body where that activates the sympathetic nervous system, and the parasympathetic helps to stabilize that. It's the fight, flies, freeze, or faint, and then or fawn, and then there is the rest and digest of parasympathetic. From an Eastern perspective, the way that I interpret trauma is if we take a look at nature, and in a sense our bodies are also nature, we're more than just neurology, that our mind and body is one, and we are also one with our environment. We can learn a lot from nature. Nature, if there is a volcano, a hurricane, an earthquake, a tsunami, nature has a self-healing mechanism. If we look at animals who interact with disasters that are traumatic, they usually know in advance when to leave, and they know when to return. And humans have that ability as well to be activating and leave, and also an ability to self-regulate. But most of the time, in traumatic events, we tend to stay in an activated state and to be triggered, as opposed to learning how to self-regulate and come back to a place of calm and digest.
That's a very beautiful metaphor with nature. It is definitely also highlights this disconnection that we have, in a sense, with very often nowadays we hear that humans oppose themselves to nature instead of thinking that we are part of it, and that we sort of represent nature as well through our own existence. What do you think about, just as you said, on this metaphor of like being sort of feeling and healing itself, right? How does it reflect on your personal personal experience with trauma as a trauma specialist?
With my personal experience with trauma, yeah. You know, I think this process of sort of learning this, being in rehabilitation and learning this medical model, then learning the theoretical model, and
Right.
finding my way of, I'm an immigrant in the United States, and so it's a matter of, well, what is the bridge that I'm on exactly between two cultures, being of Asian descent and being in a very Western society that will think medically or neurologically and down to the pixel, and integrating that with a nature perspective. And so when I work with clients, I'm often looking for where there are stoppages if something traumatic has happened. And I'm looking as a therapist of how can I integrate flow? How can I find the Tao of the body? And so we talk about, in a very phenomenological, implicit way, what are these stoppages and how do we prevent flow from happening? We use a lot of metaphors in the work, a lot of talking about trauma, but indirectly, where we relate it back to nature and body and mind, and spirit, whatever comes up. Does that answer?
Yes, definitely. It's a very, very exciting approach. Just as you mentioned before, this integration of this medical model, yeah, which is a very Western medical model on psychological disorders, with this Eastern philosophies. Yeah, I feel like a lot of Eastern philosophies often center around acceptance. Yeah, and just as you said, with this flow, with this natural processes and natural healing. Just very interesting to get to know a little bit more on how does this intuitively just very opposite models, yeah, in a sense, this medical model and this Eastern philosophers model, how do you integrate it in your practice, in your personal approach to trauma and understanding trauma?
I integrated it's, I learned the concepts of like attachment theories and disassociation, and there are all these concepts. And I think in existential philosophy or phenomenological nature of us as bodies, it is staying with and is this sense of accepting and being with something. And if we don't want to be with something, it's exploring that. I love that, you're mentioning again this idea of a medical model in the West, like, Sigmund Freud was a medical doctor, and it starts from this place of medicine, and it's very mind related. Everything is sort of mind, and it's a disconnection from the body, as if the mind is here and the body is there, and these things are not integrated. And lately, within the last few months, what I do is I verbalize things that clients may not often hear. And I say the obvious, like your mind and your body is one. And then I would go a little further and say, well, your body is nature, and your body and the nature around you, your environment is also one. And these are the concepts of Jean Genlin and focusing, of like body and environment is one. And in Asian philosophies, we've sort of like known this for a very long time, that the environment and us are not separate. And so I feel in the last few years, it's been this process of owning my place in psychotherapy, that there was a long time I thought about leaving the field of psychotherapy because it felt so out of place to think this way. And I remember mentioning this to someone, and he said to me very frankly, like, psychotherapy needs me more than I need it. And that was so validating. And that has sort of helped in order for me to keep that in mind of who we are and where we come from. Predates Sigmund Freud by thousands of years, and we think philosophically and we think communally, and we don't think individually, which is something that's heavily promoted in the West.
Right.
Yeah.
thank you very much for sharing. I'm very happy to hear that you chose to stay. Otherwise, this meeting wouldn't be happening today. It's really reminded me of how phenomenology, right, very often crosses its ways with South Asian practices, with a lot of Buddhist practices of mindfulness, of meditation, of just as you said, of this notion of embodiment of mind, yeah, like embodiment of cognition and cognitive processes overall. And this area is definitely, as you mentioned, phenomenology before. It all now gets into this like very structured, in a sense, like a logical way, yeah, like of like a
Yeah.
synthesis of this topics.
Right, it's like a very unit model way. Sometimes I use the metaphor of like everything has to find its little shoebox, that everything has to be neatly packed away into something. And philosophy, phenomenology opens up you more than just the thought process or concepts, but your experience of it.
Exactly, right.
A few years ago, I was reading, discussing phenomenology and Martin Heidegger, and read that there were a lot of Japanese students that came to Germany to study with Heidegger, and that he might have been influenced by certain concepts of Shinto and possibly Buddhism. And that made me very curious about like, what is a Shinto? And in the West, the Zen is very popular, but Zen is not popular in Japan. In Japan, it's Shinto beliefs and a deeper connection with earth and community, and seeing a reflection in each other between the environment and self. And so that sort of broadened my understanding a little more about, again, our bodies as nature, our bodies as, we can talk neurology, but if we look at our neurons, it resembles a tree branch, it resembles a running river, and to stay with the flow of things. Yeah.
Very, very beautiful and insightful metaphors. One, I have to mention it one more time. I have a question, thinking about the interview today and the talk that we're going to have. I had this question. There are so many misconceptions about trauma. It feels like that in modern days, and for a broader public, for folk people, there's a lot of misconceptions about trauma. Could you share common misconceptions about trauma that you hear maybe from patients, from clients?
Lately, I think that if there's one major misconception I sort of hear, it's and it has to do again with thinking style and how things are compartmentalized, and they come in with the concepts of like I'm insecurely attached to my partner, in terms of attachment theory, or that I have complex PTSD or have PTSD, and they can bring in, the DSM or the ICD-10, and what they're bringing, these are very thick books with like thousands of problems in there, very little solutions. And so in the slowing down and learning about what is your experience of complex PTSD, and
Right.
what is your, like, what specifically are we talking about when we talk about a singular incident as we examine it? And so most clients, like when they come in EMDR is something that I do with everyone. And there's a misconception about EMDR is that, oh, it's so re-traumatizing. It is so like re-devastating or re-trigger me or something. And that in my years of practicing it, that's never really been my experience. Maybe with a few clients, but it's not a re-traumatizing thing. In EMDR, it's used often. It's one of the best things for treating trauma that's out there, that's peer-reviewed and empirically researched. And it is, again, in a very Western way, incredibly structured. And so I don't use it in that way. And so when there's more flow in the work, clients are like, oh, I came in thinking that this would be so disturbing, to reprocess this memory, and they're surprised when it's not. Are surprised that can use metaphors in the processing of a trauma or a body sensation or an image and describing something, and it doesn't have to be the actual thing that we're talking about. So I think that's a big misconception.
Very interesting. So basically, just to summarize it, that very often clients come with sort of already prepared, boxed terminology of what they are experiencing without even focusing on the actual experience itself. Yeah, the initial authentic personal experience of this event that they had. And you try to specifically focus on that, on how they felt at that moment, how they processed it, and how basically bringing them back to the authentic experiences of events.
The authentic experience, what are some metaphors might come there if this is too disturbing to talk about? Body sensations, a sort of it's experiential and interactive, and really trying to examine something from multiple lenses as you shine a light through different aspects of it. Yeah, I think what happens oftentimes with clients when an event, a traumatic event, starts to clear and it's not as disturbing, the best part and also the worst part of the work is sort of noticing this organism, this living human being, this living organism begins to be a little stressed because they're stressed as how do I live without this thing? It's been with me for 20 years, it's been with me 15 years, and now I'm without it. I don't know what to do, that I've built my life and my ideas and my structures and thoughts about it. So it's often a very interesting place when we begin to think about how is your body readjusting to without this injury that's happened. Yeah.
I fully agree. Cannot agree even more with that statement. It's also what I see in my personal practice. I just noticed that I forgot to introduce myself. I'm actually a existential therapist, counselor, was in mostly existential phenomenological school of existential therapy. And especially this metaphors of this shining light, at specific parts makes my soul smile. It's definitely how I view the work that we are doing as therapists, that we sort of try to light up specific parts that a person is not able to see themselves. Very often this is the part of our work that we reflect this energy, sort of like this light, shed this light to this darker parts of them. And darker not in a sense of material, or context, but darker just in the sense that clients very often might not actually realize this part's existence themselves. And just as you said, was this how people literally live with these experiences for decades, of actually having it being integrated so strongly into their personality, into their personal narrative, into their story, and what they tell themselves about themselves, that once the process is started and the symptoms are lifting, or the trauma is overall, becomes less distressing, then definitely there is such experience of clients that I also hear often about, that they basically are a little bit lost, like they're trying to find themselves again, in a sense.
Trying to find this new identity, and it's a very interesting phenomena to witness within clients as they begin to heal, of like this regeneration of again, scientifically, the thought or the common language that's often used as new neural pathways are being built, and it's very curious to sort of watch a client struggle with exactly that process of, I can't return to that old way of thinking or being, even if I tried, and so where do I flow next? Where's the Tao? Where's the next movement? What is the next right step that happens in the body? Yes.
How do you usually support clients in this place of uncertainty, of this like moment of building, just as you said, a new identity in a sense?
I think I come back a lot to these metaphors and a reminder. I find myself, someone that's America's had many unrests in the last few years with like the death of George Floyd, COVID. There's just been a lot of political stuff happening here. And working with people to say, look, we're not meeting this week, or I know I'm going to be away, or in between sessions, I tell clients, you don't need to think about the work that we just did. Like, carry on with the rest of your day. Have something to do after sessions. Don't ruminate. Go for a walk. Especially go for a walk. Just enjoy your walk. And if they need me, I say, you can call me, you can reach out to me. I can also say to clients that sometimes the imageries that come up for them from within themselves and their mind, their bodies, I would say if you feel like drawing it to remain connected to it, you can. If there is an image that comes that you want to spend a little time to do a sketch, by all means. And so it's really, I'm there as a therapist for support, but it's really about building their self-efficacy and their ability of building that relationship and their strength that they have, but it's been fractured or clouded over, eroded over time. And that can be regenerative. Yeah, that's how what I do.
So by this last piece that you shared, I have a feeling that the trauma, or like you view trauma as something that disturbed the initial natural way of a person. And then the goal of a trauma therapy is then sort of restoring this initial authentic way of being, so that basically it would then allow a person to naturally heal and just as you said, reach the self-efficacy. Did I understand correctly?
I think as I hear you reflect that back to me, Bermet, I'm hearing that is correct. And I'm also hearing a reflection, I guess, of me professionally, sort of like where in the field I started out in rehabilitation, talking about physical disabilities and reasonable accommodations and equipments and adjustments that you might need. It's almost like the same thing happens, but an implicit experiential sort of way of how do you resource yourself internally, using these models of EMDR, IFS. And again, with Asian philosophies, there is oftentimes this very deep mindfulness that comes with these philosophies and a sense of spirituality. And so I think that in the West, I find spirituality has been disconnected from mindfulness, and I feel great about just sort of gently placing it back in there, because not all clients, it might not fit for everyone, but it's something that is already there, that there is something within you that is undisturbed, that there is something within you that is core and stable, and regardless of what happens externally, there is some stability there. And how do we build a relationship with that? It's not always permanent, but we can touch it and leave it from time to time. Yeah.
I also had a question. We basically started the talk today. Also, Angelina started saying that trauma overall became a very trendy word in a sense. Yeah, that not only people with psychological education start using it, but overall it's a very common word, very in a sense even popular. Yeah, even though it's a little bit weird to say such thing about pretty I would say even in a sense of a psychological terminology, yeah, that something becomes trendy and popular, but we very often see as specialists that over the years, there are sort of waves of interest, yeah, of general population on specific notions in psychology. Like there was, I think it's still going on around, but it started, I guess, a few years back, this narcissism or like narcissistic personality disorder, like saying, oh, like my ex was a narcissist, and that I could hear something like this in a casual conversation in a bus, yeah, when like two friends are talking to each other, and this is very, very interesting. And I hear the word trauma also pop up pretty often in such very casual sort of conversations. What is your opinion on that?
As I hear you capture that so well, Bermet, it makes me sad. Because what happens when we say you've traumatized me or you're a narcissist, sometimes, you know, again, as we are mammals, we are animals, we're social creatures, and we interact with each other. And so if you are taking something that was once meant for professional diagnosis and just sort of throwing it on your ex, we're no longer looking at the nuance of the behaviors and interactions. We're no longer like we're practicing yoga and mindfulness but commodifying it, but not really practicing it. So yes, your
Right.
boyfriend is a narcissist, but where does he come from, and what brought him here, and how is he this way, and what was the interactions and the experiences of his parents and his siblings and immigration, poverty and wealth? Like what was the interaction of his world that met your world that caused you to say that he is a narcissist or that he has traumatized you? And where is your responsibility or your lack of responsibility in some of this as well? So it is very hurtful. And I find more and more we are doing that here in the States, and it creates deeper and deeper divide because it causes a lot of painful hurts to each other. And it is a form of subjugation. It is a form of oppression. It also excuses me from a conversation because I can just label you and as toxic, and I can walk away from you, and I don't need to lean into you, and I don't need to try to understand you. And I can just say, I'm so tired of trying to understand you. I'm gone. And again, if we are mammals and a reflection of each other, my not trying to understand you, where you're from, phenomenologically, means that I'm also at the same time, perhaps maybe not being self-reflective at the same time. And so
Right.
it is taking, I think what the broader concept at play, and it's quite dangerous, is just a subjugation of another being, of like, I don't want to hear you. I don't want to hear what you have to say, and we will not dialogue with each other. And that is incredibly dangerous for us as a species. It is dangerous for us internally because we're just cutting ourselves off from being relational.
Right. So this sort of labeling, just as you mentioned, basically then disrupts this even this hope for communication, for building this communication, right? And having this more synthetic approach of analyzing the whole situation and why they happen. And instead, we just it's very often that people do that, as I mentioned, that yeah, they just put a label and then they walk away, in a sense, like without having much responsibility for things that happen. And this is a very popular way of withdrawal, as it feels, withdrawal from situations.
Right, right. I kind of noticed that withdrawal, and it's they turn inwards, maybe, well, not necessarily inwards, but they turn outwards. So like, I'm going to post this on social media, I will have my friends now talk about this person. And it's again, it's personality assassination. And I'm not saying that everyone, you know, if your boyfriend's a narcissist and you think that, that's fine. You don't need to interact with them. That's okay. But it's also helpful to be a little more reflective. And I think the people that do that might want to ask themselves, you know, like what does mindfulness mean to them? And how are you learning about mindfulness, or are you practicing it? And what does it mean in practice?
Right. Another interesting question that just came to my mind is how can we even separate people who actually experience trauma or traumatic event, and who are experiencing trauma right now, from people who actually are not didn't have such an experience, because just as I mentioned, in such situations, very often I get a feeling sometimes when I go to public coffee places or something, and I just eavesdrop, you know, like without any intent to do so, that every third person in the city is traumatized, you know, like, and it's a very not even negative, but in a sense that this is just not true. Yeah, like this like we understand that this is just, it just cannot be true. So I think it's a very logical question to ask you as a trauma specialist. How do we actually can divide and understand when someone is actually traumatized and someone is not?
As therapists, our role is always to validate, right? And so there's never an invalidation. If you say you're traumatized, that's perfectly fine. The common person sitting at the cafe, what could be helpful for us is to and what I try to do with clients who continue to use that word, or if we're using it in common with each other every day, is to really bring out a thesaurus. And in Jinlin's philosophy, there's something that he does that's called thinking at the edge, and really take a look at what does the word trauma mean, and look at the antonyms of what is the opposite of trauma. And so we can broaden our vocabulary of what these things actually mean. And to, again, be a little more conscientious about, do we all go through stressors? Absolutely. Are we all on planet Earth? Absolutely. Are we all connected to social media? Most of us are. And so what are the stressors that we're taking in, and how are we mitigating what is happening inside and what is happening externally from us? So where was our agency? Where was their control, or where was their lack of control? And how do we, the way that I see it in my mind and try to explain it to people, it's not just an activation of sympathetic and a leaning into parasympathetic. It's how do you move between sympathetic and parasympathetic? So someone might say that they're traumatized, and that experience might not mirror someone else's, but how do you move between these places, and what is that in-between space like? Because we can say someone isn't, but again, we validate their experiences because that's the term that they're using. But let's bring out the dictionary and also see what more is there to this.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely it is. Clients tend to somehow put a lot of feelings, and very, very complicated and difficult feelings, into this boxes, of specific terminology that they come with. And then once you start untangle it, much more experiences come out that.
Barmet, I agree with you. This is in trauma and reprocessing, it's like we are manipulating the body. Like we want to focus so much on feelings, and it's all about brain and creativity, and again, it's a neglect of the left brain, and it's a neglect of what happens between the spaces as you move from left to right. And so I think in my work, if I find the clients are leaning a lot into feelings and it's all about my feelings, I will integrate philosophies of Socratic thinking, Socratic reasoning. Let's talk about some cognitive dissonance, is a word that I throw around a lot. Like there's confirmation bias. We're always going to look to confirm that I was traumatized. Don't you agree with me? Of course. But where is the cognitive dissonance? Is there dissonance? And how can we have dissonance in our beliefs? And I do a lot of that stretching in the work with clients.
Thank you for sharing this. Sounds like I can already imagine very interesting sessions that you have with clients, like trying to get them from one dimension into another, and how they try to navigate through that.
Yeah, I do feel that I do that. And I think it's a consciousness of really knowing where I live, and we live in such a Western society. I live here, and it's this, let's divide the body up into left and right, and again, let's put the head here and the mind there and the body there, and we're just sort of separate. And it's like, good gosh, like we're more, we're so much more than these parts that we hack ourselves into.
So just to summarize a little bit for listeners, this difference between someone who is traumatized, let's say, let's use this word, and who thinks that they're not, or we would say that they're not, everything in a sense comes down to this adaptability process of like self-regulation. Yeah, in this stressful situations, just as you mentioned, we all have our daily stress, we all have significant life changes. And still, some of us adapt better and can self-regulate and have this inner resources to, just as you said, to allow this natural healing process come with time. And some of us struggle with this a little bit.
Yes. Yes, it is that sense of neuroplasticity, right? This ability to bounce back. You know, we talk a lot about vulnerability, but there's also a lot of resiliency in us being these animals that want to continue to live. And so what is the meaning? What is the meaning of our life, our purpose, our interaction with others? Yes, absolutely.
And I remembered this interesting phrase. I also teach at a university at the psychology department, and to my intro to psychology students, I usually tell this phrase that, yeah, our brain was created not to make us happy, but to make us survive. And this is, in a sense, I think, is a very good approach to look at it from this perspective of actually a function of our body, of like staying here and reproducing and like surviving for as long as we can.
Yes, so yes, we were designed for survival. You know, if you're thinking about how proteins formed, it's formed, destroyed, formed again, but there was always a wanting to live. Yeah, that is exactly it.
Another question that I have is how, so you have this practice of working with trauma, with clients with trauma, and not only with trauma, but from your perspective, how someone may benefit from seeking trauma therapy?
If there is something that, again, you know, this disability, if someone is not used to therapy, but you're interested in really noticing and observing how there's something that you're experiencing, and if you sit and you think about it, we are creatures, we're animals of habits. And if you examine, you'll find that these patterns repeat themselves, you know, intergenerationally. And so coming to trauma therapy could be, you look, I have a tendency to lean into alcohol too much, or I have a tendency to obsess over sex and pornography or something. And that obsession could mean it's pornography today, yesterday was alcoholism, you know, some other generation, it might have been something else, but it could be food, it could be anything, an overindulgence. And coming into trauma therapy means just checking it out to see what's it like and what is this that propels you forward. And if you don't do this thing, what do you think will happen? So again, it's a survival. So if you weren't looking at porn, what would you be sitting with? What are those feelings like? What are you trying to avoid by overindulging in alcohol or food or whatever? Yeah.
Amazing. Exactly this, just as you said, this, we as creatures of habit, as very social, but also very, very impulsive mammals, basically, that we try to adapt through developing specific coping strategies. Yeah, and many of them can be very non-functional. Yeah, and yeah, of course, in work we will often see that specific coping strategies are just not getting this person anywhere close to actually resolving and working with the experiences they had.
That it can be, you know, the word trauma, especially in our culture, sometimes where some people might be therapy averse, but if you sort of notice that, you know, you again looking it up in the dictionary, if trauma is not the word, then you find a different word, and you would say, oh, you know, there are these family occurrences of abuse, and I'm in this relationship
Mm-hmm.
with my partner, and he's very possessive and he talks to me like my dad. And so, you know, these occurrences between my parents that happen, that he talks to me like my dad, and my dad used to talk to my mother like this. And it's you knowing that you didn't like it when you saw it as a child and you don't like it when you experience it. It's a great point to say, let's go to couples therapy, or let's try to read about it or understand it in a way that we can do something about it and possibly make a change in terms of how we listen and how we experience each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With this listening and experiencing is that each other again a very, very phenomenological notion overall, very existential of this the notion of therapeutic alliance. This that is a core in existential therapy, as you know, the how what role does the therapeutic relationship play in the process of healing from trauma, in your opinion?
You know, earlier today, I was just coming out of a session, and I had to, you know, say to a client that if this reoccurring pattern, that if you feel that figures in authority are abusive or that they exert control, and this is not the first time I've said to her, I was like, you know, you and I, in this session, should be aware of where power and control is located. I don't really see myself as having power and authority in session, but I am like supposedly the expert, but also the client is their own expert in their experience. And so I say to her, and I've said this multiple times already, and I think I'll say it as often because it doesn't quite resonate yet, that what happens out there between you and your boss and you and your parents will interact here as well in this relationship between you and I. You cannot avoid it. It will happen. And there will be ruptures, and it's how do we address those ruptures and how do we repair them if you so want to, but we should expect them to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's not a bad thing if it happens.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just be conscientious that if it's happened everywhere else in your life, this is not a sterile place. It will also happen in here eventually. So that's the process of us being with our clients, of these reenactments.
Exactly, and often specifically through this this, just as you said, sort of mirroring the real life relationships in the therapeutic relationship between a therapist and a client. Such relationships can be studied within the therapeutic context, like why is this keeps happening, like what I'm feeling about it right now, etc., and what does it bring you overall. And this, thank you, very, very I couldn't agree more. That's exactly what I see in my own work as well. I have two more questions. We are getting closer to the end of our meeting, a very interesting meeting. The time flew very, very fast. I didn't notice anything. One of the questions is, what, of course, advice is not a good word, but what recommendation would you sort of offer to viewers who will find this video will find them, to who may be struggling with trauma, but they are, I guess, unsure about starting therapy and seeking help.
Struggling with trauma but unsure about starting therapy or seeking help. I come back to our animal bodies and I come back to nature. So let's say, okay, you don't want to come to therapy. You know, if if a deer's kid was shot or something, you know, a deer doesn't go to therapy. So as animals, okay, all right, we don't want to go to therapy, but what can you do instead? I would recommend people to stay in touch with your bodily experience.
Mhm.
You know, go, you know, again, we are not separate from nature. So go for walks. And sometimes that alone, you know, just going for a walk and clear your head. And that you walk frequently and you make it a habit to walk. It doesn't have to be
Right.
strenuous walk or some arduous type of exercise, but just walking to clear your head and breathing.
Mhm.
And perhaps you can do things again like journaling or drawing sketches, or perhaps there might be images that come to mind, or maybe this trauma is it's more, what is the metaphor that goes along with the trauma? And perhaps just sort of being your own little scientist. So there's this metaphor of a dark cloud, but when I go for a walk, it's not a dark cloud anymore. Maybe it's smaller. And you can draw
Mhm.
pictures of these things as you notice changes with the images that come to your mind. There's some basic
Mhm.
suggestions I could offer.
Thank you very much. That's very practical tips. I will also try to incorporate them in my life, as I do actually daily. Exactly. We all basically need at least a baseline physical activity. We need good nourishing meals. We need some conversations and others in our life, some social connections, and definitely, yeah, we all need that sort of this fundamental baseline to keep moving further.
In a society where we've become more sedentary, we just sort of sit and take everything in. It is important to, lately when I've been going out for walks, I've been leaving my phone at home because I just
Mhm.
I don't need it. Like 20 years ago, I didn't need it. Why do I need it now? And so just sort of disconnecting from devices and sort of, again, just being out on your own and enjoying that. Yes.
Great. Last question. It's more of a, you know, a little bit imaginative question in a sense. You being a trauma specialist, how do you feel? What do you think that is the perspective of trauma therapy? Like maybe there, because we talked today a lot about this integration of Eastern ways, yeah, Eastern ways of being and of dealing with stress and life overall, what life throws at us, and we are being thrown in this life and in this world. Um, how do you think? What is the perspective of of developing, yeah, the trauma therapy?
I think trauma therapy will be developed, whether it's scientifically. I don't know if, I think as people from a non-European places, we owe it to ourselves to create space for our philosophies in trauma therapy. And I think the biggest thing that I'm keeping on my mind as far as trauma trending is accessibility. That when we talk about two people experiencing the same traumas and how they deal with it, what separates them sometimes is wealth and the lack of wealth, or
Right.
economy, who can afford it and who can't, who has to work 2 or 3 jobs and who can work 1 job and have the time. And so as we think about trauma, it is about making it as accessible as possible, and also considering wealth and poverty, or wealth or the lack of it. And how those things creates divisions in someone's ability to heal. And I think that for people who don't access trauma treatment, if it is partly because of economics situation, I think that most often they're excluded oftentimes from major studies that are done. But there's possibly a wealth of information that we can learn about resiliency. We should not, no one should be denied medical treatment at all. But
Exactly.
if we're looking at trauma, we should also look at resiliency and those who can't afford, how do you cope? I think that's where we're at, or where we should lean into, because there is such a greater divide of wealth that is being created in our world every day.
I couldn't agree more. One more time, thank you very much, Kathi. It was a very insightful conversation. I hope many people who are watching and who will be watching, who will encounter this video, that they will find some answers for themselves and definitely learn something new about trauma and how people, how different perspectives look at trauma, right? And today we mentioned phenomenology and existential therapy and a lot of Eastern philosophies, South Asian philosophies included, and also a medical model that is very, very popular and basically central for a lot of Western cultures at the moment.
Right.
And this was great. Thank you very much. I think we have 2 more minutes to. How was it for you?
Oh, this was wonderful. Thank you so much, Vermet. This was great. Yeah. Is there, I don't know if in the 2 minutes, if there are any questions from anyone that they want to put in the chat. And
yeah, I haven't seen any questions right now. I guess maybe the questions will come a little bit later, because yeah, sometimes during our live streams it happens that people watch it later and then they might ask in the comments or something. But right now there are no questions at the moment. But I believe we did as good as we could with the given time, and this was great.
I think what I'll do is in leaving is I'll make a plug, for Eugene Junlin's work. Again, he's a phenomenologist, and his work is at focusing.org, at the International Focusing Institute. And what Gene Junlin talks about is the felt sense. And he's a big believer in listening and partnerships, and just that ability to be able to listen to someone else without interrupting and repeating basic words in a humanistic sort of way is really helpful. So even if you cannot afford therapy, focusing is not therapy, but there are plenty of access of information and his philosophies at focusing.org, where you can access that and be able to learn how to interact with these listening skills. Thank
Perfect.
you.
We are getting gratitude phrases in our chat. Everyone says thank you to you, Kathi. Thank you very much one more time. Angelina, would you like to say some finalizing words?
You're muted.
We can't hear you.
Sorry. I hope I didn't traumatize anyone. Sorry, I just joking. But anyway, it was really, like a journey to this healing actually world, because of the way you made these conversations literally like a dialogue. So thank you for that. I'm glad that I asked Bermet to talk with Kathi. Yeah, thank you very much. So in that sense, this talk was really like a cure, it's like a very therapeutic talk. So thank you very much. And I don't know if we answered on this question that we kind of put on the name of our streaming. It's like trauma, trend, or reality. I think it's both, yeah.
Yes, trauma trending, a reality check with professionals. Yes, absolutely.
Yes, and thanks for this existential, phenomenological direction, because by default the word trauma came to us from psychoanalytical direction. Yes, and in that sense, the way you made this, it's like a dialogue. Yeah, the way you made this interview, it's really, really showed this the huge field of possibility that we have in this existential direction. Myself, I love psychoanalysis. I like Freud. But thank you, yes, for this amazing interview. I also like phenomenology and existential direction. And yeah, as Bermet mentioned, so if someone kind of have some comments or questions, we usually post our videos on YouTube channel. We have YouTube channel of a professional platform, and if someone can comment something, we're kind of happy to answer. If you want to have Kathi with us again, ask us on our YouTube channel, or I don't know, we have Facebook page, Instagram, so we in that sense have pro platform everywhere, and who knows us personally also can ask something, yes, if you want again to listen, maybe Kathi, yes, to talk about something else. So thank you very much.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Angelina and Burma.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
okay, have a good day. For you it's a day, for us it's a night.
Both have a good night.
Okay, have
Bye.
a good day. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you
for
both.
talk.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching us. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.